Now I should be going to Zoom. Remind me to just, I'm going to click over the recording when this goes. Okay, so it's looking promising. Hey guys, just making sure we're going to Facebook. Yes, I can see my face twice. That's a good thing. All right. Wow. Hello everyone, and thank you for those of you tuning in live. It's great to have you, and I'm sure there'll be lots of people watching this on replay. Guys, my name's Dani Catania. For those of you who don't know me, I work as our product education specialist for our Australia and New Zealand market. And it is my pleasure to bring in the big guns here on this topic. He is one of my favorite colleagues. He's over in our home office in Arizona. He is the amazing David Despain. Some of you guys will have seen him and heard him speak at our roadshow that we just wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. And this question came up quite a bit around ketogenic diets because there has been some recent popularity, a bit of a resurgence around ketogenic diets. So I'm just going to spend the next couple of minutes just really picking your brain, David, if that's okay.
Of course. Thanks for having me on Zoom, and hello, everybody.
You have a raving audience here in Australia and New Zealand, so we love you, David. But let's kick off. So I've got a couple of questions for you, and I know that you are one of the most educated when it comes to the current literature that's around. So as I said, there has been some recent popularity around ketogenic diets. So could you just explain first, what exactly is a ketogenic diet and where did the concept come from? Why is it sort of, surfaced recently?
So the classic ketogenic diet is one that's very low carb with about 90% of your calories coming from fat. That's a lot of fat. That's actually pretty hard to do without including lots of fatty foods, avocados, bacons, etc. There's other modified keto diets that are more popular right now that are about 75% calories fats, but that's still quite a bit of fat with only about 15% of your calories coming from protein and even less from carbs, from 5 to 10% carbs. So that's really low. And the idea is to force you into a state of ketosis. Now let's just talk about what ketosis means. Ketosis is simply a metabolic process that means that you're burning fat or burning ketones that are products of the metabolism of fat. So the history on the ketogenic diet is that it was used clinically with some upsides for epileptic patients and for reducing seizures. So that was its traditional use. I think that where it started to become more of a thing was with when sports scientists started to look into it, because there was this idea that if you could teach the body to learn to burn more fat or teach muscles to burn more fat during physical activity, you could improve endurance by tapping into your long-term fat stores. Well, so some of those early studies showed some promising results potentially for ultra marathoners, for revving up fat metabolism. The problem is, one of the things, actually where you studied, Dani, in Melbourne, it was discovered that one of the downsides was that during that process of revving up fat metabolism or fat metabolizing enzymes, you actually reduce the efficiency of your muscles to be able to use carbs as a source of fuel. So that actually led, and it was shown over and over again that it actually hurt performance, and it actually caused athletes to feel pretty awful because and even increase their risk of sickness, because carbohydrates play a big role in supporting the immune system and the nervous system. So there's still some studies going on around that, but I think what's happened now is that the ketogenic diet has kind of veered off into the dieting world. And I think I like to say that it just kind of rose out of the ashes of the Atkins and the paleo diet. As soon as Atkins kind of dropped off the face of the earth and paleo began to fade away, you saw the ketogenic diet rise as the new low carb diet. And we loved, as nutritionists, we see this every few years, and we call it the sugar fat seesaw, where sometimes fat is vilified and thought of as the evil nutrient, and then carbs are vilified, and it just kind of goes back and forth in the media. So we see the ketogenic diet's new popularity due to new popular books that have kind of taken the ketogenic diet approach and steered away from paleo and Atkins. But to be honest, it's not actually really anything new. This has been a low carb diet has been pretty well studied.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, David. And I mean, just as you were talking there, like 75 to 90% fat. I mean, that's I don't know about you, but that's hard. That's hard to live. That's hard to be social. That's hard to. I mean, I like potatoes and bread too much, and pasta way too much to ever consider doing a ketogenic diet. But that's just me. So, Dave, that probably leads really nicely then on to the next question. So, now, do you want to talk a little bit about what are the perceived benefits of a ketogenic diet? And I guess what is the evidence around, basically in the current literature to substantiate these claims?
Well, first of all, there's definitely some evidence. There's definitely plenty of evidence that the majority of us get too many carbs. A lot of our excess calories that we consume tends to be from refined sugars and refined grains, etc. So, things like, donuts and pastries, and yeah, we could all use we could all use less carbs. But I think with the perception of the ketogenic diet is that by reducing carbs to an extreme level, you're going to cause faster weight loss. And the part of this is because of this idea that carbs are more fattening than fat. But this is simply a misunderstanding of how carbs work. And also often when I talk to people who are on a low carb diet, they have a misunderstanding of how the hormone insulin works in the body. So there's a hypothesis out there that's been kind of floated around in popular media that because carbs and insulin are so related, that insulin will cause more fat storage. That hypothesis really hasn't held up to scrutiny. The truth is that insulin kind of works as a hormone that helps you to. It's the anabolic hormone that builds either fat, and it can also build muscle. Depending on what nutrients are taken in, and depending on if you've exercised that day. There's a lot of things that go into that. But we do have studies that have looked at ketogenic diets pretty closely, and and you can look up these studies. You don't have to take my word for it, but we know exactly what happens. And so let's talk a little bit about that. For one, you might lose a little more weight initially but mostly from water, because carbs attract water. So you'll lose a little more water weight. But I'll start with this study. In a study in 2006, there was just here close to Isagenix at ASU. There was a professor, Carol Johnson, who we worked with actually on our own studies. Her lab compared a low carb ketogenic diet to a typical low fat diet, and found that both were equally effective in leading to weight loss. That the weight loss was completely driven by calorie deficit, and there was no difference between the two diets. But what she did see was that those on the low carb ketogenic diet, they had experienced adverse effects in terms of lipid profiles, so cardiovascular risk factors, and in her words, there was severe metabolic and emotional effects. So, poor mood among subjects, and also cardiovascular issues. So that was a study in 2006, well before the ketogenic diet was ever popular, although it's a pretty recent study. Then I think the most recent study, and probably the one that everybody's kind of pointing to now that's been very interesting, was done by Kevin Hall at the National Institutes of Health. And you can look this up. It's definitely an interesting study. So this was a state-of-the-art metabolic ward study. A metabolic ward study using a low-carb ketogenic diet and comparing it to a high-carb, low-fat diet, and again, keeping calories constant. So the metabolic ward condition basically is the gold standard of nutrition research, because you're using doubly labeled water to measure average energy expenditure, and you're taking into consideration where calories are being burned from, whether it's fat or carbohydrate. So at the end of the study, Dr. Hall reported that the subjects all lost weight throughout the study, corresponding with the reduction of calories. And another myth to tackle is that there's some who believe that a ketogenic diet actually leads to an increase in energy expenditure. In this study, there was barely a detectable increase in energy expenditure, but they did see a decrease of metabolism. And one thing that he showed was that the body fat loss slowed after a while on the low-carb ketogenic diet. So there was less loss of body fat. And this was despite lower insulin levels, and it coincided with an increased loss of fat-free mass and use of protein for energy. So basically, the folks who were on a low-carb ketogenic diet for a long time, they were actually losing protein. They were actually burning protein instead of fat. So they were losing. That's not something you want to see. So that's yeah, they were burning fat, and you'd get to that, but it just spoke again to the fact that it probably is not the best diet for long-term use.
That's so great, David. And I was just taking some notes there as you were talking, just so I could summarize all that you just shared. So bottom line, just correct me if I heard this right, just for the benefit of everyone listening to this. So basically, it's refined sugars that really get us sort of into trouble, or that get carbs into trouble.
Because
we're not talking about really good whole grain, carbohydrates. You said there was a lot of the misinformation around the role of insulin and where ketogenic diets mistakenly get, what's the word, kind of drawn into this, improved insulin metabolism cycle, when really you've just shared that the current evidence suggests that's not the case. One of the other things that you mentioned were that, carbs really, when we've looked at the science, are really not more fattening than fat. It's really total calories that come out at the end. You mentioned, I thought this was a really good point. You mentioned that at this initially on a ketogenic diet, there is more rapid weight loss because there's water weight lost initially because of, as you're moving that carbohydrate stores, you're releasing some of that water as well. But it's unfavorable when it comes to your lipid profile. So your blood lipids and basically your metabolic engine is a little out of whack because of that, that large majority of your energy coming from fat. And I thought, just to summarize what you just said in that study, just to be clear that we're communicating this. So in the studies that that you've just reported on, so there's no increase in energy expenditure, which is often something that ketogenic diets, like you said, proclaim that you're burning more and higher amounts of energy. That's not the case. We saw a decrease in metabolism, right? And that came from the majority of that came from a loss in muscle tissue. But did I have all of that right?
Yes. And that was from a metabolic ward study. So you can't really argue with it. It was from the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. So this wasn't
biased in any way, or
no bias, very prestigious. We're not talking about, popular diet books here.
Yes. Awesome. I love that, David.
And I'll just add, related to that insulin, one of the things that I always tell people is like, you want to make you don't want to be afraid of insulin. You want to make insulin your friend.
Mm-hmm.
The most important way to make insulin your friend is exercise. If you exercise and then you have carbs, then and protein, then those carbs and protein get shuttled into muscle glycogen and muscle building. Insulin is your muscle building hormone.
Yeah.
It's also your fat building hormone. So if you're sitting on the couch and you're drinking lots of sugary beverages, yeah, insulin is not going to be your friend.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to, but it's not. Insulin is like the traffic cop. It just tells. It just kind of shows. It tells food where to go. And if you've exercised, then you're more likely to use that food for building muscle and glycogen, or you're going to use those same calories for building fat, depending on what you've done in the day. So that's an important distinction.
I love that, David. So the next question that comes up is often, do cleanse days, do Isagenix cleanse days achieve a state of ketosis? Can you speak a bit to that?
Yeah. So on cleanse days, you're going to be burning some fat. You're also going to be taking in a little bit of calories. So it wouldn't be like it's more like a mild state of ketosis, not like a full state of ketosis. And again, just to make sure no one confuses the term ketosis with ketoacidosis, that's not the same thing. Ketoacidosis is a product of diabetes,
and not a good thing.
Right, when you can't use insulin correctly. So that's not the same thing. Ketosis is totally normal and fine. Ketoacidosis is a serious problem. So ketosis is simply the metabolic process of burning fat, and you will achieve that. I like to say if you're looking for weight loss, then you shouldn't worry so much about trying to achieve a state of ketosis, but rather making sure that by the end of the day, your activity levels and your intake of calories leads to a calorie deficit, and then you'll burn fat while you sleep. So it's not really it's not an issue of trying to achieve that state, but just making sure that you stay within a calorie deficit to burn more calories overall, regardless of whether it's from fats or carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome, David. Thank you. So really, in a nutshell, from all of the current evidence that we have available to us right now, it seems that what you've said, an eating plan that allows a calorie deficit with adequate protein is really the way to achieve weight loss and maintain those results, right? Anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, well, in fact, just leading off what you said is recently there was a position stand written by the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and in this position stand was co-authored by our own scientific advisory board member, Dr. Paul Arciero, and you could look this up. It's the position stand of International Society of Sports Nutrition on dietary strategies, and this group looked at all the different dietary strategies, and included in that were ketogenic diets. And one of the conclusions of this group was that there are many dietary strategies available with similar effectiveness for improving, for leading to weight loss and improving body composition, but the driving factor was calorie deficit. Now, the paper also noted, and this is key for Isagenix users out there, that a higher protein intake, a higher intake of quality protein, combined with resistance training exercise was required to maximize muscle retention during this weight loss. So pretty much what we do with Isagenix. And here's the great thing. On the position stand, they also talked about intermittent fasting, which is basically cleanse days, and discussed that as an effective strategy for improving body composition, comparable to calorie restriction. So basically what they're saying is intermittent fasting or cleanse days can be effective, and maybe even just as effective as typical dieting. It might be even easier than typical dieting, just looking at reducing calories daily. So I would encourage everybody to look at that position stand, and could we put the link there?
Yeah, I'd love to do. I was just about to ask you. We should post the link.
Because I think that's a good one. It speaks to ketogenic diets, and it's kind of like the most recent conclusions from a good body that discusses not just ketogenic diets, but several dietary strategies. And what you'll find is the conclusions are very similar to what we espouse here at Isagenix. Higher intake of quality protein, resistance training exercise, and intermittent fasting are really the best ways of losing weight and most effective ways of losing weight. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to read that.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely post that link as soon as we get off this video. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. Guys, I really hope that that has helped to answer some of your questions. We really wanted to share, really what the science is really saying around ketogenic diets, around intermittent fasting, and of course, what we do here at Isagenix. So thank you so much, David. And I look forward to our next interview on another, interesting topic. Bye for now.
Look forward to it.
Thanks, David.
Bye.